Hello there and welcome to Star Wars Comics in Canon, your guide to the wider Star Wars canon through the comic book lens. And to take you on this journey, I'm your host, Mike Burton. So, for episode 7, we are going to be talking about the Star Wars Allegiance comic miniseries. Now, the Allegiance comic series was basically released during the Journey to the Rise of Skywalker line of media. As well as this, there was the Resistance Reborn book, the Force Collector book, and lots of other things. For anyone who isn't aware, whenever Star Wars release new films in the new canon, they generally do a Journey to the blank line of books and comics and things that kind of get released beforehand to kind of build up hype for it and, give some background details to certain characters and things. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Now, just to confirm, The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker have around a year between them or so, and their set, Last Jedi, is 34 years after the Battle of Yavin, and Rise of Skywalker is 35 ABY. So this comic Allegiance takes place somewhere between that time. I think, judging by how it kind of seems, it would be more nearer The Last Jedi than Rise of Skywalker, but that's more so speculation. Now, before getting into the plot, there is the writer, which is Ethan Sachs. You've got the penciler, who is Luke Ross. You've got the colourist, who is Lee Loughridge. And you've got, as I said, there are 4 issues of this comic. Issue 1 came out October 9th, 2019, and the 4th issue came out October 30th, 2019, which were about 2 months before The Rise of Skywalker. Now, The Rise of Skywalker is currently out on home release, and it's coming to Disney Plus on May the 4th, unsurprisingly. I will still not really be talking about it that much. There's a character that's in this comic that is also in the film. That's it. There's not going to be any spoilers for Rise of Skywalker. So if you haven't seen Rise of Skywalker, you can still enjoy this podcast. So, for some of the key points of the plot, as well as a few extra details, I'm going to start now. The comic opens with the ice planet Ta-Nuna, which basically gets destroyed by the First Order. They have loads of Star Destroyers around the planet, and they basically barrage it. Now, the Ta-Nuna are classed as neutral thinkers. They're kind of philosophers, they're scientists, things like that. And they even say at the start, like, even the Empire left us alone. They just kind of left us to it. We're neutral, we're fine with whoever. And the First Order said, well, you helped some of the Resistance, because the Resistance stopped off there for something and then went elsewhere. So the First Order, trying to be more sort of a closed fist, more of a force to be reckoned with than the Empire, they desolated it, essentially. The next scene is about Rey kind of having issues with her force powers to some degree. She's fighting this big beast thing, and she keeps trying to use certain force powers, and she isn't succeeding specifically when she wants to, and she kind of talks about trying to get focused and trying to hear the Jedi call to her, things like that, which are bits that kind of happen in Rise of Skywalker a bit. And essentially, throughout this miniseries, Finn and Poe are off doing their own little side mission thing. They're basically trying to get some weapons throughout, while the rest of the characters basically do other things. Finn and Poe I will talk about a little bit, like a tiny bit as we go through this, but they don't really do anything that's that exciting or anything like that, so this will be focused more on the other guys. So basically, Leia, Rose, C-3PO and R2-D2 go grab Rey, and then they all go to a place called Mon Cala. Now, Mon Cala is where the Mon Calamari and the Quarren live. Now, everyone will be familiar with what a Mon Calamari looks like, because Admiral Ackbar, the famous "It's a trap," he's a Mon Calamari. Also in the film Rogue One, you've got Admiral Raddus. He is also a Mon Calamari, so you get the gist of their kind of fish people-ish. Now, the Quarren are actually in Star Wars a hefty amount. I think their first appearance was Return of the Jedi. The derogatory term for them is basically squid heads. If you have read the Kylo Ren comic, one of the Jedi, who is not human, is a Quarren. There's also, as I said, there's in so many of them. If you've seen any of the Clone Wars or anything like that, you'll know what the Quarren look like. But they're basically squid-headed humanoid people. They've got like a couple of small tentacles on their face. That's about it, really. So once Leia and the crew basically get to Mon Cala, they speak with someone called Aftab Akbar. Now, Aftab is actually Admiral Ackbar's son, and if you remember from The Last Jedi, Admiral Ackbar was killed in quite a anticlimactic way. I don't know, a lot of people weren't happy with how sort of quick his death was for such a beloved character, but he dies in The Last Jedi, and so his son basically kind of like replaces him in Rise of Skywalker, and he is introduced in this comic. His son was born in 16 ABY, and so at the time of Rise of Skywalker, he's about 18 or 19 years old, so in this he's around 18-ish as well. Aftab and Leia get along, they speak a little bit and things, and then it kind of goes on to the rest of their meeting. Meanwhile, Finn is tracked by bounty hunters and things while he's with Poe and stuff, trying to collect these weapons. And then he goes back to Mon Cala, where it's people sort of talking and feeling quite annoyed that Leia and Rey have kind of come down here. Although Leia's had interactions with the Mon Calamari and the Quarren in the past, they still believe that because when she came and spoke with them and things, the Empire came afterwards and there's a lot of destruction and things, and even though Ackbar and Radis supported her, they don't all feel the same. Now, we'll say with Admiral Ackbar, a little fun fact, his first name is actually Guile, Gial, I may be pronouncing that wrong, but Guile Ackbar, and also he was born before 52 BBY, the exact date is not confirmed, so he was born prior to the Phantom Menace by about 20 years, and we know he was about for a bit longer before that as well. During the Clone Wars, he was actually a captain, so the Clone Wars was around 22 to 19 BBY, so at that point he was already a captain, so that he must have had some degree of experience at that point, and I think he's like fairly old-ish by the time of Last Jedi. I think he's generally considered sort of a similar age to Leia, Han, that sort of thing, so that's a general gist of how old he is throughout the films. Anyway, back to the story. While Leia is off speaking with Aftab Akbar and a few other people, Rey, Rose and Chewie are basically ambushed by some Quarren fighters with some sticks and things outside their ship. They all basically fight those guys off, and in the meantime, another Quarren individual who's fairly high up in the sort of ranks and things, his name is Chadkol Gi, potentially Chadkol G, he sends a message to the First Order and says, look, your resistance here, come get them, essentially. Following the physical confrontation between Rose, Chewie, and the Quarren thugs, for lack of a better word, essentially Rey, Rose, and Chewie all get arrested, and then while Leia's trying to smooth things out and talk it over with the Mon Calamari people and trying to say, think about what happened, and they're kind of all discussing it and things, certain people in the Quarren and Mon Calamari are taking different sides and things, and then Rey basically says something about challenging them to combat, and they basically say you can do that, so she challenges one of the leaders, I think is Chadkol Gi, to this. He says, you wouldn't be fighting me, you'd be fighting this droid, after she's already said yes, and it's like a battle droid from the Clone Wars. Now, a little bit more flavour text. Mon Cala was featured quite a lot in the TV series Clone Wars. It's in some other comics as well. One of the main storylines I remember is from the main line of Star Wars comics, which is issues 44 to 49, I think was the story arc, as well as the Darth Vader comics, the second run of Darth Vader comics, also called Darth Vader Dark Lord of the Sith. Within that, there is a plot line which actually links in with the Star Wars arc as well. So essentially, while it's happening in the Vader comic that is set only a couple years after Revenge of the Sith, he goes down there, causes some havoc essentially with the Empire and things, and then when the mainline run of Star Wars comics are out, when Leia and the gang go to Mon Cala, that's after episode 4. So it's about just under 20 years difference, but it's quite interesting when the comics were coming out and when they were being released. If you read the newest Star Wars comic and the newest Darth Vader comic, the same plotline was going on, but it was 20 years different. So as one of them was discovering, there's some ruins here of this, the other comic would go back to showing you how those ruins happened. I just thought that was quite a cool thing of showing a good way into Mon Cala is there's the Clone Wars series, which there's quite a few arcs of that. I think Water World is one of them, or Gungan Battle, those sort of things. And then also the comics themselves, the main run of Star Wars and the Darth Vader comics. Both of them actually combine really nicely together to give a plot for that. And this is why this droid is in this, fighting Rey in the Allegiance comics, because Mon Cala was shown quite a lot in the Clone Wars, so it's quite a nice little nod to that. One other thing to do with the Clone Wars series is that in the Clone Wars series, one of the royalty was a prince called Lee Char, and in this comic, the king is called Etch Char, and they say they're related in some way, so it's quite cool seeing the bloodline essentially in those little sort of tidbits of information that make the universe kind of a bit more connected, I suppose, from people who like me who see a lot more of the content. So back to Rey fighting this droid, she fights it, it's basically ends up shooting into the crowd, so she kind of tries a bit more defensively to get at it then gets the upper hand on her, it's about to kill her, and then Rose shoots it, and that basically is against the rules, it's dishonourable, so they all get banished and exiled from Mon Cala. While this is all happening, Poe and Finn are basically still just kind of running and fighting bounty hunters and finding out clever ways to defeat them without having to go straight for them guns blazing. So that's happening while this is all going on. As Leia, Rose, and Rey, and Chewie, and C-3PO, and R2 are all heading to the ship after they get banished, a bomb actually blows the ship up. Then the last issue of the comic start with Rey protecting the group from the blast, including Aftab Akbar, who is with them at the time. So she protects them using the Force. There's boxes and things and the explosion itself that she protects them from. And throughout this comic, it's been sprinkled information about with the Force. She's been trying it, and she can get the knack with it sometimes, and sometimes she can't really. And that's kind of showing that she's kind of overthinking it a bit, and she needs to kind of feel it a bit more. That's a nice little thing there. And then after that blast happens, she notices that basically the perpetrator who did it is a Quarren. He's running off in the distance, so she chases after it and asks Rose to catch it as well. They eventually basically just catch him down, and it ends up being Chad Kolgi, the one who called the First Order. While this all happening, Finn and Poe continue to fight the bounty hunters and stuff, and then basically comes back, and Leia and the rest of them take Chad Cole to the Mon Cala leader, and basically Leia says, instead of punishing him, why don't we come together, use this time to let's band together against the First Order, who are going to come and basically kill us all, rather than us all fighting between ourselves. Let's kind of go and do this. A lot of the Mon Cala agree, and then Aftab Akbar is basically said to be the captain of the ships, and he basically takes several of the Mon Cala ships to them. In the past, the Mon Cala have given ships to the Resistance and the Rebellion before. In fact, in The Last Jedi, when Admiral Holdo, the woman with the purple hair, played by Laura Dern, when she committed the Holdo maneuver, which is when she fired at light speed at the First Order fleet and decimated a lot of their ships, that was in a ship called the Raddus. And the Raddus is a ship which was originally given to the Resistance as a Mon Calamari ship. And you'll see that in the days of the Rebellion, so the original trilogy, there were quite a few ships that had this sort of rounded shape and things. They were pretty much all Mon Cala ships, and obviously Akbar and Raddus both captained Mon Cala ships. And then the final parts of the story of Star Wars Allegiance is that Poe and Finn, in their adventure with the bounty hunters, they basically escape, unsurprisingly, and the bounty hunters don't all die or anything. They basically just say, we've got this other operation going on, we'll just do that and go ahead with that. And then the final sort of panels of the comic is that the First Order decide to occupy and attack Mon Cala. The attack basically starts just as the Resistance escape, and one of the Quarren, who is a general in all the ranks, he says due to the failings of his soldier, Chad Kolgi, the one who basically betrayed them all and sent the First Order here, he did a suicide mission where he basically got on a ship and flew straight at the First Order to distract them, while the Resistance could fly off on the other side of the planet Mon Cala, because as the First Order started to appear, it looked like the Resistance weren't going to get out. So they eventually get out, the First Order see them, start shooting at them, they shoot in hyperspace and disappear, and then that's basically where it ends. So after that point, a few more months go by, and then the events of the Rise of Skywalker. And that's really it for this comic miniseries. I think it is a really good miniseries. I quite like it, sort of filling in gaps between movies and things. I quite like seeing what they've been up to, and also due to myself being a fan of a lot of Star Wars content, seeing things like Mon Cala appear is quite a cool thing for me. It's quite a nice introduction to people who haven't really familiarised themselves with the Quarren or the Mon Calamari people, or Mon Cala as itself in general. So it's a good way as an introduction in that regard, and obviously it's a little introduction to Akbar's son, Aftab, as well as if you're already a veteran and you know about Mon Cala and stuff, it's nice to see a throwback to other Star Wars media. So I do quite like this one. It is a good miniseries. I wouldn't say it's one of the best ones, but it's quite good. As I say, there's not a huge amount necessarily that happens. It's all one sort of arc, but it's a cool one, and I enjoyed it, and I think it's worth a read. And that's more or less all I have to say about this matter. So I'm going to leave it there. Just as a thing for next week, I believe I'm going to do the Beckett and Cassian and Andor comics. Both of those have been one-shots, and they were kind of, leading up to or just after the respective films Solo and Rogue One. So I'm kind of keeping in that theme of just at the moment having them to do with the film specifically. I think after I've done that, I've kind of done all the specific movie tie-in comics and things. And then I'm going to jump around a bit. I think I'm going to do the Obi-Wan and Anakin comic coming up, which was released a couple years ago, and it's actually made by Charles Soule, who actually did the second run of the Darth Vader comics, which I actually mentioned in this one, the Dark Lord of the Sith Vader comics, which is set a couple years after Revenge of the Sith, as well as the Rise of Kylo Ren comic. So he did all of those ones. He's one of my favourite comic book writers, and he is doing an upcoming book for the High Republic. So I'll probably do Obi-Wan and Anakin maybe a couple weeks at a time. And then I'm also thinking of doing the Star Wars comic run, the first annual. So I'm kind of going to try and dot it around. I don't want to then, once I start the Star Wars mainline run of comics, I'm not going to spend ages doing all the Star Wars comics just for like weeks and weeks because people get bored. So I'm going to try and dot around and things. So I've been focusing quite a lot on the sequels and the newer films recently. I'll jump back to do the Obi-Wan and Anakin ones in a couple weeks, and then I'll do the main run of Star Wars comic, which will be I think the first comic that was released under the new canon, so that'd be quite cool. And then I'll kind of bounce around and going back and forth from the mainline Star Wars comics every few weeks, as well as doing some of the other ones, because there's quite a few prequel comics and there are loads of original trilogy comics set at that time, plus the Age of Rebellion, Age of Resistance, and the Age of Republic comic one-shots, which are incorporating the heroes and villains, each having their own one-shot comics. So there's a lot of cool things to come, but as I always say, if you guys have any recommendations of any kind, contact me on social media at Genuine Chit-Chat on Instagram, Twitter or Facebook, or email me at StarWarsComicsInCanon@outlook.com, or you can even just contact the guys at Comics in Motion via their social media, Comics in Motion P, and tell them to get a message to me. If there's any comics or anything you want me to tackle going forward that I haven't already mentioned, let me know. I'm more than happy to consider them and stuff. But yeah, that's what we've got coming up. As I've said in previous episodes, be sure to check out the other shows on this channel. The flagship podcast, Comics in Motion, the Indie Comics Spotlight, which I was recently on an episode of, doing the Second Coming, which I had a lot of fun doing, as well as Max Burns' Mandatory Marvel and DC. Plus, I have my own podcast called Genuine Chit-Chat. That's on its own separate feed where I speak to a different guest each episode. And I've had some of the guys from Comics in Motion on there, as well as Tony Farina was recently on there too. So, check that out, and thanks so much for listening, guys. May the Force be with you.